This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, JM Ryerson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Let's Go Win podcast, where we are here to help you be happy, healthy, wealthy, and get better every single day. I have a friend of mine that I got a chance to get to know over the last year or so. He is an awesome dude. He's got a cool group that he works with, and I actually had the pleasure of speaking in front of his group, and it was awesome. Mark Hummel is the CEO of Inspector Empire Builder, a coaching, training, and mastermind group that serves the home inspection industry with business education, coaching, support, and strategy for growing your business. With more than 4,000 hours coaching and countless hours facilitating team building and leadership development training, Mark brings an industry-specific perspective to building scalable and thriving home inspection companies. And he's just a good dude, man. I'm excited to have a chat with you. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Really excited to dive into some of this stuff together, and really just loving the work that you're doing, connecting great voices to leadership, and some of the stuff I've listened to on your podcast with just bringing out personalities around leadership, I think is really powerful as well.
No, I appreciate that, brother. And I am passionate about leadership. There's no doubt about it. And I had a chance to really watch you on stage at one of your events, and you did such a nice job. But before I get to that, I'm curious, brother, why home inspection? Where did this world, did you fall into this? Was this by design? How did you choose this specific industry?
That's a great question. And people ask me this all the time, with the assumption that I'm going to have a long storied history in home inspections. And that's just simply not the case. So I don't come from the home service industry. I'm not a real estate agent. I've never done a home inspection. I did happen to fall into what I do now based on the things that I love to do. So I'm actually a paramedic by trade. I spent a lot of my days, my younger days in the career field, if you will, as a paramedic, and then a field supervisor and an operations manager for a large county EMS agency. Did a lot of work with state level emergency management, things like that. And then there was this big pivot where I started to realize that there were so many patterns I could see with people and in the leadership development lane, and all these gaps all over the place that were affecting real lives in the emergency setting. And I just sort of became obsessed with human behavior, and then coaching, and then facilitating and speaking and different things like that, which ultimately led me to where I am now, leading this mastermind group for home inspectors. We just happen to have the niche of home inspectors, but really what we focus on is the person. And that's how I fell into it.
Yeah, and I got a chance to witness that. I mean, again, one of the biggest compliments I'll give anyone, and I'll give it to you right now, which is you are the same person on stage as you are off stage, as you are eating dinner. There's no mask with you, brother. It's like you're just this kind, nice, humble guy that is just puts himself out there. And it's such a rarity, honestly, brother. So when I see it, I embrace it, where it's like, dude, that's awesome. Have you always just been comfortable just being vulnerable and putting yourself out there? Or is this something that you've had to practice? Because I watch you on stage, and that takes time for people to get that comfortable. But you did, man. You just hopped up there and you were you, and it works so well.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. You know, people assume that when you're good at something, you've always been good at it. And I that makes me cringe sometimes, right? And if we spend some time thinking about that, we sort of intuitively know that people who get good at things practice a lot. I don't consider myself to be a great speaker. I don't consider myself to be a guru in anything. But one thing I do feel like I've gotten really good at through practice is having a desire to live life at the margins. And what I mean by that is the margins of growth, right? Like just really in that level of discomfort that sort of brings novelty to what you're doing. And so for me, that is doing things like being authentic and being myself, regardless of whatever happens around me, what people tend to think, that kind of thing. And so, you know, the truth is there was a time where I wasn't that person, always was on the inside, but maybe not outwardly. And it's part of why I made this big shift from emergency service to business coaching and personal coaching and different different things like that too, is I wanted to live a more authentic life too, and not feel like I was performing in front of people all the time. And so when I started to really understand authenticity and things like leading with curiosity and the fact that there really is no failure so long as we keep going, I became a way better version of myself. And that's kind of what I live and breathe to do with other people too. So not just focusing on myself, because I'm, again, no expert on anything here. I just know my story. And my story is one where I went from purposefully never connecting with anybody because there was a lot of fear-based sort of what if they don't like me kind of stuff to, you know what, that's okay. Life is more fruitful and more fulfilling when you're authentic and curious and can help other people bring that out for themselves as well.
Yeah, man, I want to talk on this leading with curiosity because I literally was doing a coaching session prior to you and I being on. And it's one of the things I mentioned is like, look, man, when you come from a place of curiosity, there's not any, in my opinion, conversation that you can't have in a comfortable setting, something that you may have thought was going to be really confrontational. But when you come from a place of just, hey, I'm curious what happened here without labeling, it's amazing how now we can have a conversation about anything, no matter how taboo it seems, whether it's religion or politics. I'm coming from a true place of curiosity. How does that show up for you in the business world, brother? Because I know having those uncomfortable conversations, those crucial conversations is something that's it's kind of scary for leaders in the beginning. But when you said that, I was like, oh, dude, he gets that. So talk to me about that, leading with curiosity. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge in coaching, as I'm sure you know. We've got to stay in the pocket of curiosity. And I think that's a great leadership skill as well. But the thing that's missed sometimes is the second half of that, which is not being tied to the outcome of what you discover. And so when we judge the outcome of what we're asking about, for example, if I'm being curious with you and I ask you some questions about your podcast or about the coaching you do, and then you answer and I'm judging internally what you're saying, that's going to kill my curiosity, right? It's going to completely lead me down a path of you are a good or you are bad, a very black and white view of things. But when we can lead with curiosity without a tie to the outcome, I think then we can have way more authentic and deep connections with people. And really what we're talking about is judgment, right? And so some of the highest minded people I know have really mastered this, this concept of being non-judgmental when they're leading, when they're coaching, when they're building a business, when they're building their team. It's like there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do things, but there are things that go a direction or not a direction. And it's our job just to kind of keep things within the bounds. And we do that with authentic curiosity, not tied to the outcome of what we discover.
Is that why masterminds work so well, brother? Because you have so many different voices coming at it from so many different angles. Because, and look, if you go into a mastermind with a fixed mindset, like this is the way I'm going to do it, A, you probably shouldn't have signed up to begin with. B, you probably won't get much out of it. But when you truly go to a mastermind where you're open to other people's thoughts, opinions, you get a chance to share, and you're looking to grow, is that really the whole basis of what a mastermind? Because you hear that word thrown around all the time, but I think people miss the ideas like, dude, mastermind, as in there's many people here that we're all going to share, and you really have to have an open mind. Is that one of the keys, brother?
100%. Yeah. And I see that all the time with hundreds of people in our mastermind group. The people who jump in and are open to hearing other ideas, that doesn't mean you have to accept them, by the way, but they're open to hearing them, exploring, and at least considering the fact that there is an alternate way to view things. Like they thrive. Their vision expands, they get to know people, they build relationships, and they inevitably make these little shifts in the way that they think, which causes a huge trajectory shift for people. But the folks that come in, and I see this, unfortunately, periodically in this industry and others, really because it's human nature, is people will jump into a mastermind group expecting to hear just information that affirms what they already believe. And that is a recipe for disaster. You're going to not see a lot of value in the new ideas that you're exposed to. You're going to not see a lot of growth personally or professionally. You're just going to kind of be in your little silo judging everything that people are talking about. And at that point, you're just wasting your money, right? Why be in a mastermind group at all if that's the mindset?
Yeah, and they've actually done studies. This is fascinating to be talking about, where they've had kids try to do a project versus adults, and the kids will beat them almost every single time. I think because of this concept, the kids are open-minded, they have no judgment on the outcome, and they incorporate play. And somehow we lost that along the way as we became adults and got all serious and I'm stuck in my ways. It is fascinating to watch how kids can literally outperform. Maybe their mental capacity is not as high. Maybe their IQ is certainly not to the level of the adults, but they outperform every single time because of those three things. How are you guys incorporating play into what you guys are doing with masterminds and really keeping people's minds open to different possibilities?
I love that question. And to be honest, we don't think about it as play, and maybe we should, because that's a really powerful concept. I've read a lot about that. The idea of even adults believing that they are just playing. They're just on the playground of life. There is no failure. You can get hurt and injured and things like that, but there's no there's no end game. You're just there playing around, learning through trial and error, which is the psychological benefit that kids get from playing, is they learn their boundaries, they push on them, and it helps shape their mind. In the mastermind group, though, the most important thing is that people understand in a mastermind, like, we're never saying here is exactly what you should do. And people expect that sometimes, especially because we are a very niched down group, right? Home inspection companies, just the business building side. We're never talking about doing home inspections. We're talking about building home inspection companies. And so people come in sometimes expecting that we have just this playbook, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And while we do have a lot of content like that, we don't believe that there's any one size fits all kind of business building framework. It depends on your strengths and weaknesses, depends on your market, depends on a lot of things. And so what we say is, hey, like, we provide a framework of thought. And if you can come in and expand your mind, expand your vision, expand your relationships, what's going to happen is you're going to start to fill a lot of gaps that you would not have been able to fill without those, without the exposure to the new thoughts and the new people and all those kind of things. But we've got to be open to it and understand that we're not just looking at one linear path to anything. So I'll take that a step farther and say that sometimes in the coaching lane, when I'm talking to people, something that's really interesting to me is people don't do well with that sometimes, right? There are some behavior patterns that do really well with abstract information, and they can take that abstract information and go make it their own and come up with a plan and a strategy and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of people too with a behavior pattern that is very precise and specific, and they want step-by-step instruction. And so sometimes those people don't do very well in a large mastermind conversation where they feel like they need very linear steps in order to take action. So how do you fit those two? Yeah. The question is, how do you fit those two together when you have those two styles in the room together talking? It's a really interesting dynamic.
Well, it certainly leads to, if people are open to debate, which debate's not a bad thing. That's what's so funny is people get uncomfortable because we're arguing. No, man, this is how we grow. When you're uncomfortable, you're growing. You've said the word pattern several times, and that's clearly something that led you to even get into this, where you're like, hey, I'm seeing patterns with leaders, and I want to dive into this. What were you seeing, Mark, where you're like, ooh, not such a good pattern, or hey, I like this pattern? What was that really brought you to this, where you're like, okay, this pattern, can you put your finger on what that was?
Yeah, it's probably a really long conversation. This pattern, it's actually a developed talk that I give sometimes too, with the patterns for leaders. And the most concise way I can put it is that everybody has an energy pattern, right? And by energy pattern, what I mean is we all kind of peak and we all kind of go down into the valley sometimes energetically, motivation, drive, passion. Like we never stay peaked, and we never, hopefully, never stay in the valley, right? And so I didn't quite understand how to explain this when I first observed it, or when I first noticed that this pattern was like universal across all the leaders I had met, all the people in coaching. And it was profound when I started kind of wrapping my mind around it and researching and really diving into the neurology of it and all of the different places that this is talked about. It kind of goes like this. So as leaders, a lot of times we can come to the table with just this hard charging drive, right? Like this high level of motivation and passion and vision. And then inevitably at a point, typically after pushing really hard with something, there's a cliff. And there's a downward trajectory in motivation and drive and energy. And sometimes that goes to a really dark place for people where it's like, man, did I ever even actually have this vision? Did I ever even really want this? Am I the person? This is where fraud syndrome starts to come in and different things like that. We're kind of down in that valley. Well, that interested me enough, like the peaks and valleys piece of the conversation. But then I thought, if it's inevitable, if there has to be a peak and there has to be a valley, which is true, neurologically speaking, and just behaviorally speaking, we can't peak all the time. So there has to be a valley. So if that's true, the valley must have some kind of use, right? It must be there for a reason, just like the peak is there for a reason, to drive results a lot of times. And I started studying this pattern. It's like a sine wave, if you will, right? Ups, downs, an upward trajectory, a downward trajectory in the middle. And so the question I came up with was, okay, I want to study this. I want to understand it in people. So let's try to understand each piece of the pattern. So when somebody's on the upward trajectory, what typically happens is things start to occur easier. You start to feel less friction. You start to feel like there are less distractions. And then when you're peaked, you typically feel like, man, the world is it just is in my corner, right? Things are just happening. You don't feel slowed down. You feel energetic. You feel like things are just going your way. And it almost gets to like this effortless flow state. Some people are really good at getting there. Some people are really good at staying there for a long time. But inevitably, there's a drop. And in that drop, that's where we start to see the diminishing returns on your efforts, right? A task that might have taken you 20 minutes is now taking you 2 hours because you're not thinking as clearly. There's a lot of friction in your workflow, that kind of stuff. Then we get to this valley and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in a painful place now. I don't want to do anything. I don't know if I'm even motivated enough. I don't want to lead the team. Like all these kind of negative, all of these kind of, negative is not the right word, but all of these kind of, let's just stick with negative for lack of a better way to put it for now. All these negative thoughts start popping in, right? Okay, so that's the pattern: upward trajectory, peak, downward trajectory, valley. Well, everybody has it. What do we do about it? So I started studying the neurology, around patterns like this. And really the biggest thing that stuck out to me is how, as leaders, and by leaders, I don't mean people who are just playing around. I mean like true leaders. As true leaders, people who care about leading, they want to stay at the peak all the time. And so what we typically do is we'll redline it, right? Like revving your engine all the time. And we just try to push harder, and we use willpower and grit and motivation and all these techniques and things to try to just perform at the highest level all the time. Well, guess what? That's not realistic. The valley is coming. So what typically happens is the leader will get to the valley burned out and really frustrated and mad at themselves because they're not staying at the peak. Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just work 12 hours, 16 hours like I did last week, right? That kind of stuff starts to pop up. So if everybody wants to stay at the peak, but we all know the valley's coming, the lesson for me was there's got to be some kind of use for the valley. And this is where the idea comes from that deep growth requires deep rest. And that's the piece of the pattern most leaders, I think, are missing. It's like the growth happens in the rest. We have to purposefully use the valley, not just get there through burnout.
Brother, this is awesome. I have never talked about this on my show, and I used to do serious deep work with my groups, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So, whenever I used to work with people, I would ask for their goals, and they would inevitably do it off of 52 weeks. Well, that's unrealistic. Let's just say Christmas or that holiday season. You have Thanksgiving, you have 4th of July. So you're already not at 52 weeks. And what I've found was 44 weeks a year was about the most optimal that people could really work. And how it was designed was, let's say you go for, I don't know, 6 weeks straight, and then you take that week off and you design your goals around that for the year. Is that the type of rest that you're talking about, brother? I'm just curious because literally I used to do a whole training with a lot of 1099s on this very subject because, again, they're not required to be there every single week. Right. They have the flexibility with being a 1099. Same for business owners to a degree. And so having that rest, that's where a lot of growth did come because, again, now you're outside of the business. You're not focused just on the logistics. When I say that 44 weeks, how does that grab you, man? Am I anywhere close to what you were finding? Or when you say really, here's the peak and we need to find that rest, what does that look like in your world?
Yeah, I love it, man. So your 44 weeks is a great concept. And the way you asked me like what's popping up for me when I hear 44 weeks. So if we were talking about this and we were coaching together, maybe I was the coach, if we could put that hat on for a minute. What I would say is, JM, in 44 weeks, you're going to have peaks and valleys. So let's understand that. So it's a very individual formula. And using myself as an example, what I did to understand mine is I journaled every single day for 90 days, asking the question, where am I in the pattern today? And what I found for myself is there were micro patterns and there were macro patterns. So micro pattern would be like throughout a 24-hour period, when are you most energetic and when do you have diminishing returns? So some people can have incredibly high output in 4 or 5 hours, and then they have this steep diminishing returns, and they should, in my opinion, they should stop working at that point. Like, go do something and fill your cup. Don't just work another 3 hours and only get 1 or 2 things done because you have diminishing returns, right? So that would be a micro pattern. And we need to understand that for people. But then the macro pattern, going back to myself as an example, what I found for me is about every 6 weeks, I've got to disappear. Like, I've got to change my environment. I've got to change what I'm focused on. Just for, maybe a few days, just take a little breather, go hiking, do something like that purposefully to not be focused on what my day job is. And that fills me up. And the way that I got to this 6-week idea for me is I realized that my pattern is to push really, really hard for a long period of time. And then I just want to disconnect. I desire to disconnect, not in an unhealthy way, but in a way that allows me to just hit the reset button. And then I can go for another 6 weeks. Now that's different for people, right? Some people can go for maybe just a couple weeks and then they need to hit the reset button. Some people can go for maybe a long, long time, who knows how long, and they've got to hit the reset button. But at some point, we always go into the valley and we have to hit the reset button. And if we start looking at the neurology of this, like leveraging brain science, right? I'm a big fan of that. Excuse me. If we leverage the brain science here, what neuroplasticity tells us, what developing new neural pathways tells us, is that deep growth happens during deep rest. And there's 2 forms of that. There's active rest, which is like what I just described. I'm not physically resting. I might be going to hike or go out of town or something like that. And then there's sleep, right? There's actual rest, like sitting back, staring at a wall, or sleeping. And so when we think of like 44 weeks, for example, back to what you said, how many cycles of growth can we go through in 44 weeks as a person? That would be a question to answer. It's not one, right? It's not one 44-week cycle of growth. It would be more like, how many times can you flip the deep growth and deep rest model within that 44-week time frame? So let's establish your pattern. And then let's talk about it. Let's identify what you feel like and what you think, what your thoughts are like when you're at the peak, so that we can understand what your thoughts start to become when you start to slide down that downward trajectory. And then what we want to do is we want to use the valley very purposefully. And this is where I go into coaching with people sometimes is, hey, man, we can design the valley. It doesn't have to be this dark place of burnout and frustration. It can actually be more like, oh my gosh, I'm peaked. I'm starting to realize I'm going downhill. Let's program in some rest. Let's take advantage of this because it's necessary. So we want to focus on active rest, sleep, and really just kind of changing what we're thinking about for a period of time, short enough to just not lose momentum, but long enough to actually have some growth. And then we get right back to it. We get back on the upward trajectory. And what I have found with people is that when we can purposefully use the valley, we don't stay there as long. It's not as deep. And then we get better at going up the curve and getting to the peak in a more efficient and faster way.
No, it's absolutely amazing. I love this conversation. I could go for you said this is a big conversation. I could talk about this for a while. Because I so agree with what you're saying in terms of checking in. You said you ask yourself a question, I think on a daily basis, where am I at in terms of the peak of the valley? Is that true? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
100%. I draw it out as a wave, a sine wave, and I literally will put a little X. Where am I today? Where am I on this? How close am I to the peak? How close am I to the valley? And it's not easy. I don't want to paint the picture that this is effortless, because sometimes there's some interpretation that has to happen, like, and so I put a little X on the pattern and try to determine what my next move is based on where I am. So the most useful places on the pattern, in my opinion, are actually not the peak or the valley. Where we see the most opportunity is on the upward piece and the downward piece, because that's where decisions are made. If we can have an awareness that, hey, man, I'm on the upward trajectory here, I better start planning in some big stuff because I'm going to peak and be my best, and I'll be able to move mountains right now. Versus, oh, I've got some diminishing returns. I'm getting frustrated. I probably should not have huge things on my plate for the next few days while I program in some rest, right? Where we can start to understand the pattern and leverage it, that's where we become really, really powerful leaders.
Yeah, this is also fascinating because they've done studies on when jurors are making decisions, or they actually did it with people that are choosing on whether somebody should be paroled or not. And they were showing the pattern. I love this word because I never use it very often, but I love what you're saying is in the mornings, they were very clear on what they were doing. And in the afternoons, they were not doing as many clear decisions as a whole. And what they found, it was actually the lunch period that was actually taking them from their decisions in the morning to the afternoon. And the point I'm trying to make is when you have a big conversation to have, frequently we are at a much higher level in the morning. We're a little more clear. We haven't dealt with as much stuff. And so if you have a big conversation to have, it's probably a better idea to maybe recognize and do that in the morning versus having a really important discussion with your wife at pillow time, because we're not as clear. We've dealt with the whole day. And so again, I'm trying to see if that lands for you as well. But that's what I've noticed. When I have big decisions, I choose to do them in the morning when I'm fresh after my meditation, after my journaling, after working out. Like I'm as clear as I'm going to be that day. If I've done like 3 podcasts and a coaching session and it's the afternoon and you ask me a really important question, like, is it time for a raise? Probably not the best time to ask me because I am in more of that peak versus, or excuse me, more of that valley than I am the peak. Are you recognizing it that much in a day for yourself as well?
100%. Yeah. So for me, I'm up at 5 a.m. and I get my best work done between 5 and really probably about 9, 10 o'clock. And then the rest of the day, still working really hard, but that's when I'm in meetings and coaching and different things like that. But a lot of the high level thinking work that I need to do is done when I'm the freshest. And then I start to have diminishing returns almost inevitably at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that's for me when I know it's time to stop doing the brain work and go get a good workout in, something like that. So I'm the opposite of what I hear a lot, which is workout in the morning. So I want to do the brain work in the morning and go do the physical work when it's time to relax, which is a powerful concept all by itself. As a quick side note, if you have a very mentally demanding role, what they say is that you should relax doing something physical. And if you have a very physically demanding role, you should relax doing something mental or cognitive, right? Reading a book, listening to a podcast, zoning out, watching TV, whatever. So it's not the same for everybody, though. For example, if I tried to have a gigantic life vision kind of conversation at 5:30 in the morning with my wife, it'd probably go nowhere. Right? Because her energy pattern is a little different. She peaks usually late in the morning to early afternoon. And so we have to have some awareness of that, even in our marriage. It's like, hey, when we're going to connect over some big things, it's not going to be the earliest point in the morning or the latest point in the night where neither one of us are really at our most energetic level. When we bring that into business and we start thinking about, leadership, the question is, hey, when can I be my best during the day doing this type of big mind, big vision work kind of stuff? When can I be my best connecting with my team? When am I at my best for connecting with your clients? You can start to time batch according to that. If you can, right? If you have that much control over your schedule. So this is a very fun conversation. There's many, many layers to it. And we're not even really at the very nitty gritty, nerdy science of it yet, which is the fact that this is, neuroplasticity and new thought is actually a very physical process, similar to growing muscles after you work out. You don't form new thought while you're thinking it. You form new thought through repetition and rest. And so we could keep going with this however far you'd like to, but at the end of the day, man, it's all very individual, and it's up to the individual to understand their pattern. That's where coaching comes in and getting help with that. But there's really easy tactics for it too. For example, that journaling piece, you mentioned that you journal, I journal. I always tell people journaling is an amazing tool. And if you've never done it, if it seems like something that's difficult for you, well, you're just not good at it yet, right? You've got to do it a handful of times before you get a level of comfort with what you're going to write, how long you're going to write, that kind of thing. But here is the power of it. When we journal and we get our thoughts outside of our head, one of the things that instantly happens is we have less noise, right? Less noisy thought. Because as we go from our mind to our hand to the paper, we're filtering out a lot of the noisy thought that comes with the things that we care about. And it really gives you an opportunity to focus on what's most important, or to formulate and process thought, which again is a form of growth. And so as we start to really layer this stuff on, then we go to habit change, behavior change, and different things like that through repetition, which is leveraging neurology. So journaling is a form of repetition, understanding the pattern. Hey, where am I at today? Where am I at today? Where am I at today?
Yeah, no, and that's essentially, again, you use pattern, I use the word trigger, but it's essentially recognizing, to your point, this is individualized. Everybody's different. For instance, if I'm in a real valley, but I have a super important meeting that I'm about to have, I'm putting on music and a specific song because it gets me back almost to flow as fast as possible. That's what I've found for me. And I only could find that through literally checking in with myself. How am I doing? And I never use the word pattern, but I really can see it now. It's cool. And the other thing you mentioned with the spouse, and my wife and I are very clear. I have that first hour or hour and a half in the day where it's like, please don't come with me at any negativity at all. I need this time for me so I can really show up as the best. And we have that agreement with one another. Whenever that is violated, oh, bro, it throws me for a loop. I'm like, oh man, you're messing up my whole day. Now, of course, it's on me, but it is interesting that you mentioned the spouse, because Lisa and I have the exact same setup where it's like, look, give me that first hour and a half, 2 hours of the day so I can show up as my best. Yeah, man, this is so much fun. I could talk about this forever. Neuroplasticity, what got you into it? Because I'm a brain geek or nerd or whatever you want to call it as well. I think it's fascinating. We don't know that much about it, but there's some awesome resources if people do get into it. So what got you into really neuroscience and looking at all this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, my roots are in healthcare. And so one of the things that was true when I started to see patterns in leadership was that I was already thinking about biology and the brain and how things like that work. Now, it was a very rudimentary approach back then, just being a paramedic. It's not super deep training with how people think. But this weird thing happened when you run teams of 40 plus paramedics. You start to see these vast differences in how people respond to critical incidents. A very personal approach for some people. And then for some people, it's just almost doesn't even bother them. And so I got really curious about like what the heck's going on there? Like, I was one of the people that was almost never bothered by really bad stuff out in the field. And so in my early days, I just kind of assumed that should be the case for everybody, but clearly it wasn't through my observation, right? Some people were really deeply affected by the things that they were exposed to. So that was probably where I first became curious about it, as I wanted to understand what was going on there. And really what that led to is how incredibly important it is to understand people's past story and how that has turned them into who they are and how they think. And the concept through neurology, as we connect the dots here, is a lot of times a paramedic, let's say they're in their 20s or 30s, right? They've got 20 or 30 years worth of repetitious thought that is now causing them to react to their world a certain way. And so I took that concept, which again, I didn't understand it for a very long time. I just started getting curious about it. And that's one of the reasons that I really wasn't in the field all that long as a paramedic, about 5 years. And then I went into management, and because I became more interested in people. And eventually I left that whole field to go become a consultant and a coach and work on the private side of business. And really, I just wanted to do the same thing, understand why people are the way that they are so that I can help them have a level of self-awareness as a springboard to who they want to be. And neurology, I think, is the vehicle for that. It's leveraging neurology, leveraging this thought that, hey, if we can understand our story and how we got to where we are, then we can start to frame where we want to go using our unique strengths, our unique thought patterns, our unique behavioral pattern. And yeah, I guess I'll pause there. That's because I'll keep talking, but that's where it is, right? Like, understand the past, understand who you are, and use that as a lever to pull to become the person you want to become. That's neurology.
Yeah. And my next question was on the leadership attributes that you wish everybody had. And what I was going to say, I was going to give you one, which is self-awareness. You have an extremely high level of self-awareness. And again, I'll attribute that to your journaling, attributing that to your ability to step back and just observe. That allows you to have that self-awareness. My question would be, what other attributes, if you were everybody listening, you're like, look, this is what I would love to see leaders really have to thrive as leaders, because that's what I think most people, as whether you're leading a big team or a small team or just yourself, there's certain patterns, to use your word, that I think great leaders have. And self-awareness is one of them. And that's clearly a strength of yours. What are some of the other ones that you've seen, Mark?
Yeah. So before I share a couple more, one of my favorite phrases is that the more deeply you understand yourself, the easier it is to connect with other people. And I've just found that to be true in coaching and for myself consistently throughout life, is that the more deeply you understand yourself, the easier it is to connect with people. And then the second part of that is the less you judge yourself, the deeper those connections will be with other people. And so self-awareness, I think, is really the root of everything else for leadership. Like, it kind of springs or grows out of that. But another one is going to be that curiosity piece that we talked about before. Curiosity with yourself, asking yourself great questions. And there's something we didn't make up this phrase, but we love it. And we use it in our mastermind group all the time. And it's the quality of your life is going to be determined by the quality of questions you ask. And so we say it in IEB, the quality of your experience in IEB is going to be a product of the quality of questions you ask in IEB. So same concept. I think that curiosity with yourself is going to lead to that self-awareness piece. And when you have curiosity, authentic curiosity, not surface level, like, okay, I know I need to ask some questions here, but authentic curiosity, you want to know more with your teams in leadership, then what you get in return for your curiosity is trust. People feel seen and heard and like you actually care about their well-being. That doesn't mean everybody makes it, right? Some people are good at a job or bad at a job. But when we're in that pocket of curiosity and we're constantly assessing and developing that muscle, then we just become more authentic and trustworthy, in my opinion. And those are the kind of things that start to attract talented people to us, is when it's not about us. Like, it's about getting to know other people. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I heard it once. I'm sure lots of people have heard it, but it's like, if you want to become the most interesting person in the room, be interested in everybody in the room. And make nothing about yourself. And even in sales, when we're teaching sales to our business group here on Mastermind, one of the things we say is, hey, in your first meeting with a potential client, it's okay to not talk about your business at all, not even mention your name. Just continue to ask them questions, get to know them. And this is a coaching phrase I use a lot. Your job is to understand their pain points so well that they just believe you have the answer. You don't even have to say it. And that's through curiosity.
Yeah, man, it's Dale Carnegie obviously really made that popular, where it's like, look, in order to be interesting, you need to be interested. Mark, you're an interesting guy. What you do is fascinating. Where could people connect with you online, whether it's in the home inspection world or they're just like, dude, I like this guy, I want to be a part of his mastermind, whether I have anything to do with home inspection or not? Where can they connect with you, brother?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So there's a couple places. One is I'm easy to find on Facebook. I spend a lot of time there connecting with people in our industry, the home inspection space. So anybody can connect with me there, and feel free to shoot me messages. I try to respond as much as I can to people there. One interesting thing I started doing is I wanted to deepen my own understanding of things I was purposefully working on. And so I started writing and just trying to share, 1,000 words or less each week. And so I'm on Substack now as well. That's kind of new to me. So I'm open to people's feedback, and, I'm really just trying to make sure that influence impact never rests on me. I'm just pushing it out to the world as soon as I learn something new. So I may not be good at writing, but I'm on Substack if people want to go follow there. And then, of course, people can always reach out to me, shoot me an email or something like that. If they're in the home inspection industry, it's mark@iebcoaching.com.
Man, I literally, I connected with you when I spoke. You're just one of those people that you're genuine, you're humble, and you're an interesting guy. So I could ask you questions all day, but I'll let you get back to it. Thank you for coming on, man. I didn't know where we were going to go with this conversation, and we talked about everything but home inspection for the most part, but so many fascinating things that apply to coaching and leadership and training and how people can show up as their best self. So thank you, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks to you as well, man. And the truth is even in the home inspection mastermind group, it's not about home inspections, man. It never is. Whatever you're doing, your audience, you, me, whatever we're doing, it's not about the thing. It's about who we're becoming. So I've really enjoyed the conversation a lot as well, man. Really appreciate it.
It's truly my pleasure. You guys go check him out. I mean, go check out Substack. He said he's not a guy. I guarantee he's a great writer because he's so vulnerable. He's so self-aware. I enjoyed this conversation immensely, and I know someone else will as well. Please share this out with somebody that you're like, gosh, I wish they would get this part about self-awareness or their patterns, really finding that time to rest so you can grow, recognizing your peaks and your valleys. I mean, this is awesome. Share this with someone that you love and care for, and let's continue to grow the Let's Go Win movement, and go help Mark with IEB and grow that as well. Until next time, you guys, remember, your mindset matters. I appreciate you all. We'll talk very soon. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, JM Ryerson.